Welcome to Shuffle Source. I'm your host Brandon, and today we are kicking off a brand new video series, 10 cards to add to your 99 in honor of the brand new Foundation set that came out. The 10 cards we are going to discuss today are all new cards, none of them will be reprints. It is important to know that the cards displayed are not ranked in any order. We simply have a number there to let you know what number card we are discussing, as we will be going over 10 of them in this video. And lastly, before we begin, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps the channel and it really helps others find our videos. And with that out of the way, let's begin. The first card on our list is Valkyrie's Call. For 3 colorless and 2 white, we have an enchantment that reads, whenever a non-token, non-angel creature you control dies, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. It has flying and is an angel in addition to its other types. So, due to the nature of this being an enchantment, I like to think of this card as essentially a harder to kill version of Luminous Broodmoth, with the major difference of the fact that they decided to build in a governor on it so that it's not easily as abused as much. The governor in this case obviously being the fact that by adding the non-angel clause to it, whenever a creature then dies and returns, it comes back as an angel, and then that way you cannot continue to loop this forward. However, there's already a way around this if you wanted to play with creatures that have the persist ability. You do this by having the non-angel creature with persist dying first, then have it come back as an angel with that +1/+1 counter. Then if it dies again, let the persist ability on it resolve first, so that it comes back now as a non-angel with the -1 counter. You can then keep repeating this over and over again. If you have a sacrifice outlet then with a strong payoff, you can likely, use this infinite loop to an effect that will essentially win you the game. Honestly, even if you don't want to go that route, having a sacrifice outlet in general is probably good with this card, so this way you can sort of force the evolution of your creatures, if you will. Why wait for them to die when you can sacrifice them sort of on your opponent's instep, and then on your turn they're already back stronger and evasive? Seems like something that would be a good strategy. But even if you don't want to go that route it's still generally just a pretty good card and makes you a little bit less afraid of non-exile removal or board wipes. I think that just due to the general utility offered by the card, I think it won't have any problems finding its way into the homes of many commander decks. Next up, we have Scrawling Crawler. For 3 colorless, it is a 3/2 artifact creature Phyrexian construct that reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player loses 1 life. So the first thing going for it is that since this is an artifact, it can go into any colored deck you want. This card is also criminally undercosted for what it provides. For 3 mana, it is both the engine and the payoff all in one card. It forces the card draw, which is the engine, and then it damages your opponent, which is the payoff. Normally, you would expect each ability to be on a different card. Instead, this card has both. So you might be asking yourself, which commanders does this card go great with? Well, the first commander that comes to mind would be Nekazar. Nekazar absolutely loves this card. He's going to continue to punish you for drawing. Gev, Scaled Scorch, would also love this card, as it is forcing each of your opponents to take 1 damage during your upkeep, which then activates the maximum benefit he gets from putting counters on creatures you bring out during your turn. And lastly, let's not forget, Valgavoth is also going to love this. The idea is that you want your opponents to take damage on their turn, and the very first time they do take damage, Valgavoth's ability will trigger, so you get to put a +1/+1 counter on him and draw a card. Scrawling Crawler enables this, as the first time they draw a card on their turn, they're just going to take the damage that you need to trigger Valgavoth. The next card we have is Electroduplicate. For 2 colorless and 1 red, we have a sorcery that reads, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it has haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this token. It also has flashback for 2 colorless and 2 red. So this card really has a lot of potential. Getting a copy of your best creature for whatever situation you need until the end of turn has just a lot of flexibility. I personally think one of the best ways to get the most use out of this is casting it on a creature that has both an amazing ETB and an attack trigger. If it has both, then you're really maximizing a lot of what this can do. But you don't have to have that perfect scenario. A lot of times you can just get away with either a great attack trigger or a great ETB. So for example, let's say you had Atali, Primal Conqueror. Yes, you will lose the original Atali due to the legend rule, but you're still going to get that sweet ETB trigger if you choose to keep the token. and you're going to get to steal 3 cards from your opponent and still later be able to swing with it because it has haste. And then if you have a way to sacrifice it for value afterwards, you're really sitting pretty good. Then of course next turn, or even if the same turn, if you have the mana available, you can flashback this card to copy something that you then just stole from your opponents. I think one thing to call out there is that it having flashback just provides a real additional bonus there. I really think we're just scratching the surface on this card. I think there's a lot of commanders and a lot of decks that would really love to have it. The commander that comes to mind when I first think of this is going to be Zada, though. Zada decks will really love this card. Instead of just creating one token that's a copy of a target creature, you get to create a token copy of all of your creatures on your board. Again, when you target Zada, you'll have to deal with the legend rule, but who really cares when you're going to get a copy of everything on your entire board? This is just a sweet card for that deck. Here we have Homunculus Horde. For 3 colorless, 1 blue, you have a 2/2 creature homunculus that says whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a token that's a copy of this creature. The first comparison people like to throw out there that this is the blue version of Scute Swarm. Now granted, it's not as powerful as Scute Swarm, but it definitely is Scute Swarm adjacent with what you're trying to do by creating as many of these as you can so that they exponentially get out of control. I think this is a very fun card. In order to get the maximum benefit out of this, you want to try to be drawing at least 2 cards, not only on your own turn, but on your opponent's turn as much as possible. So when you're looking for a good home for Homunculus Horde, you typically need to make sure that you either have a commander or a deck that really lends itself to a lot of card draw, especially even on your opponent's turn. When I first saw this card, the first commander that came to mind was Miss Bumbleflower. Miss Bumbleflower rewards you for casting multiple spells a turn. The second time you cast a spell on any turn, you get to draw 2 cards. That is the perfect amount of cards you need to trigger Homunculus Horde. So what you'll find is that when you cast multiple spells on other players' turns, you're going to then get the draw 2 cards payoff, which immediately triggers Homunculus Horde. So she is an excellent commander if you're really trying to go wide and maximize Homunculus Horde. Super fun card. I think there's going to be a lot of homes for it. I'm really excited to seeing giant boards with Homunculus Hordes everywhere. Next, we have Archmage of Runes. For 3 colorless and 2 blue, you have a 3/6 creature giant wizard that says instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. So this is a very interesting card because not only is it giving you a cost reduction on casting instant or sorcery spells, but it's also giving you a reward of drawing a card whenever you cast them. The ideal scenario here would be that the cost reduction helps you maximize your mana to cast as many spells as you can, and then the drawing aspect of this then fuels more cards for you to hopefully then cast at the reduced price. This is a way for you to really pop off with a deck that will benefit from this card. Now, what type of decks benefit from this? This is definitely going into any Spellslinger deck that has blue in it. I'm personally excited to try this out in my Bria deck. In my Bria deck, not only am I a Spellslinger and can benefit from both of the abilities on here, but the 3/6 body that this card has can then become unblockable and get stronger with the prowess that Bria gives. I'm really excited to put this in my deck and give it a try. I think if you have a Spellslinger deck that has blue in it, this is worth slotting in and giving it a try. Our next card is Banner of Kinship. For 5 colorless, you have an artifact that says, as this artifact enters, choose a creature type. This artifact enters with a fellowship counter on it for each creature you control of the chosen type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter on this artifact. This is an amazing artifact that works very well with go-wide typal-based decks. If you have things like zombies or rabbits or soldiers even, anything that really goes wide on the board where you have a bunch of these tokens, this is the perfect artifact to add to your deck. This most of the time will actually act as a game ender. You will often be able to play this and then just attack all and win the game. If you have 10 soldiers, for example, on the board and you put this down, all of your soldiers are now getting +10/+10. So what you'll probably find is that when you play this, oftentimes you're about to win the game. So again, because we want to build a big board before playing this card, we're going to want to look at commanders who really encourage the idea of going wide. You could look at commanders like Krenko Mobboss, for example, or maybe you could use something like Chatterfang. These type of commanders really lean in towards the typal creature strategy and try to pump out and create as many of these relevant creatures as possible. These are the type of decks that will really shine with Banner of Kinship. Next up, we have one of the most sought after cards from this set, Bloodthirsty Conqueror. For 3 colorless and 2 black, we have a 5/5 creature vampire knight that has flying death touch. Whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. Damage causes loss of life. So for 5 mana, we have a 5/5 flying death touch creature to start with, but what really makes this card shine is that loss of life ability. This text should look familiar, as it is the text that you would find on the card Exquisite Blood. Exquisite's Blood ability is half of a very popular looping win condition when paired with the likes of Sanguine Bond. These two effects together will create a loop that, if your opponents can't stop, will win you the game. Another interesting note is that the other half of the combo, the Sanguine Bond ability, was also included in a very similar way on another creature from the Foundation set, called Marauding Blight Priest. It's not word for word, but it will still achieve the same looping mechanic that I mentioned before. If you were already going to be running Exquisite Blood anyway, you can just consider this version instead, or more than likely just run both if you want the redundancy or the likelihood of hitting your win condition even faster. As far as commanders that are going to want this deck, obviously Edgar Markov pops into mind first. Any other vampire commander would also fit, or really any black deck that really wants to fit on that loss of life or that sort of looping win condition that we mentioned. It's just a really strong card, and I can see it slotting into many decks. The next card we have is Raise the Past. For 2 colorless and 2 white, we have a sorcery that says, return all creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So we are at a point in Commander history where we have a lot of really good 1 or 2 drop creatures. There are even decks that exist now that are built around with a focus of low-cost creatures. A popular deck that's being brewed right now is obviously the Heir Apparent deck that you're going to probably see for a while. Even recently, we started seeing decks around Templar Knights not too long ago. Again, these are both very low cost, and they run a lot of them in there, which would obviously be what you're looking for a card like this. If you're wondering if your deck should run this card, a lot of times consider if your deck has a lot of combo pieces or enablers that are 2 or less mana. For example, there are a lot of decks that use something like a Zulapur Cutthroat, or similarly powered low-cost creatures that are actually really key to your deck strategy. It's really important to keep them on the battlefield, and this is a way for you to get them back. I think there is a threshold of 1 to 2 drop creatures that your deck should have before you even really want to consider running a card like this. I think at minimum you probably need 15 creatures, but you should probably get closer to 20 to 25 if you really want to maximize the effectiveness that this card brings you. I also think that if you have a low-cost commander, that will also help, because it gives you the flexibility to sometimes maybe put your commander in the graveyard instead. And then if you know you're going to play this card, you can get your commander out from the graveyard instead of paying the commander tax. As far as where this card will go, honestly, if you have any sort of low-to-the-ground deck that has a lot of low-cost creatures, this card should be high on your list to pick up, and it will slot in nicely. Next, we have Koma, World Eater. For 3 colorless, 2 green, and 2 blue, we have an 8/12 legendary creature serpent. This spell can't be countered. Trample, ward 4, and whenever Koma deals combat damage to a player, create 4 3/3 blue serpent creature tokens named Koma's Coil. Koma is an 8/12 trample ward 4 that can't be countered. Not only that, when it connects against your opponent, it's going to get 4 3/3 Koma Coils. If Koma is the only creature you have on the board and you connect, you just built yourself a board. You went from 1 to 5 creatures with 1 attack activation. This Koma also pairs well with the previous Koma, Cosmos Serpent. Having both Komas on the board will really help make Koma even more oppressive than he was before. Some commanders that would really like to have Koma World Eater, how about Adrix and Nev Twincasters? Do you know what's scarier than connecting and getting 4 Koma Coils? How about getting 8 Koma Coils? Wow. However, the commander I'm most excited to be trying Koma with is Zimone, Mystery Unraveler. I love the idea of being able to sort of cheat Koma into play by using the Manifest Dread mechanic and the landfall trigger that she has. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to have a face-down creature go over to smack an opponent, and then at the last minute flipping over to reveal Koma, then getting rewarded with 4 Koma Coils. I think this is going to be a very fun card. He's going to slot into a lot of decks. Honestly, you could pick any sort of Simic deck. The idea that you can just ramp so hard and get Koma out, he's going to be so difficult to deal with for your opponent, and the payoff on him is huge. And lastly, we have made it to one of my top 2 favorite cards from this set. It is Blasphemous Edict. For 3 colorless and 2 black, we have a sorcery that says you may pay 1 black mana rather than pay this spell's mana cost if there are 13 or more creatures on the battlefield. Each player sacrifices 13 creatures of their choice. A lot of people have been excited about this card. They have been comparing it, of course, to Blasphemous Act. Now, it's not quite Blasphemous Act, obviously, but I do see the comparison there that there is an opportunity for a reduced cost there. I think the fact that there's an opportunity to pay 1 black to wipe the board, essentially, is pretty amazing. And even if you have to pay 5, it's still totally worth it for the fact that it's not a destroy spell, it's a sacrifice. What's amazing about it saying sacrifice is that it will get around things like indestructible. So this is a very strong board wipe in black. Honestly, it's probably the second best black board wipe that exists. Of course, the first is still going to go to Toxic Deluge. There's just way more flexibility around being able to kind of pick and choose how much you want to pay into the strength that goes into Toxic Deluge so that you can sort of still kind of keep your stronger creatures around while wiping out a lot of the board. But honestly, Blasphemous Edict is going to be a black staple, or anywhere that you have, honestly, black in your commander decks, Blasphemous Edict is going to slot in very well. And there we have it. Those are the 10 cards for you to add to your 99 from the Foundations set. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments below what you thought about the list. Are there any cards you think I should have mentioned? Let me know. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date with even more content. And of course, thank you for watching.